Who would have thought that the 2023 through 2024 college football playoff national championship game would be a matchup between the Michigan Wolverines and the Washington Huskies? Two programs that are outside of the top 10 in 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite, which is an index that measures how talented your roster is via recruiting rankings, and two teams that have not won a national title since the 1990s. They haven't won a national championship in the 21st century. They have not even played in a national championship game in the 21st century. Washington, before the season, made the college football playoff in 2016, but lost in the semifinals. And Michigan made the college football playoff in 2021 and 2022, but lost in the semifinals. This season, in the final four-team college football playoff, Michigan and Washington stand at a 14-0 record. These are the only two college football teams whose 2023 season isn't over yet, and they will face off on Monday, January 8th. The question that I want to field today, as these teams do not recruit at an elite level, they are elite developmental schools. Jim Harbaugh is rumored to be out after this season, and it's totally plausible that Kalen DeBoer in the near future could be looking at a bigger job, but none of those things are certain. But since they're floating out there, who needs this more? For the program, for the near and long-term future of Michigan and Washington, who needs a national championship more? Before we dive deeper into this topic, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more college football content. When I release more content talking about this game, I'm going to be giving videos, or releasing videos rather, giving reasons why Michigan and Washington can/will win this game. And I also want to release more content, if I have the time, to talk about some potential matchups and maybe team comparisons or certain roster positions, if you will, and really zoom in and inspect this game under a microscope. So subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see more content about this game. I'll be extensively covering Michigan and Washington in the 2024 preseason, as College Football with Sam is the best Big Ten channel on YouTube, and these are both Big Ten teams. So if you know any Washington fans, Michigan fans, or fans of any Big Ten school, share this channel around, share this video around. And if you want to support the channel and gain access to even more college football content, including some exclusive videos and blog posts of mine from the national championship game, as I will be there in person, traveling to Houston to watch this epic game take place, you can check out my Patreon page and sign up as an All-American or Heisman patron via the link in the description and the link in the pinned comment. If you just want to support the channel and be thanked at the end of every video, you can sign up as an all-conference patron. And lastly, answer the question. Two questions, actually. Who needs a win in the national championship game more between Michigan and Washington? And did you pick this matchup in the national championship game in the preseason? Because I frankly don't know anyone who picked this matchup to occur in the national championship game. I know that many people picked Michigan and Georgia. I know there were people who picked Alabama and Georgia. There were people, I think, starkingly enough, who even picked Clemson to participate in this game, and they had 4 losses in the ACC conference alone. There were people who picked Texas versus Georgia, or Ohio State versus Georgia, or Michigan versus Alabama, or I know some people picked USC. I think Dan Mullen had USC in his national championship game. I picked Michigan and Washington to match up in the preseason in the college football playoff, but not in the national championship game. I thought that Georgia would retain the 1 seed and go 13-0, winning the SEC, and that they would match up against number 4 Ohio State seeding-wise in the Sugar Bowl. And I thought that Michigan would default to the Rose Bowl, and I thought that Washington, standing at a 12-1 record, winning the Pac-12, would be the 3 seed, and that Michigan is the 2 seed, Washington is the 3 seed, would match up and play in the Rose Bowl, which I predicted Michigan to win. Ohio State to win the Sugar Bowl. These are preseason predictions. And I thought that Michigan and Ohio State would have an epic rematch for the national title in which the Wolverines would win, defeating Ryan Day for the second time in the same season, and that Michigan would win it all. I will see if my prediction on Michigan winning it all from a preseason point of view and also from a week-by-week point of view, as I maintained that prediction throughout every week of this season, unlike others, and also picked them in my preview and prediction video to win 38-27 over the Huskies. I will see if my maintained prediction that Michigan will win the national championship will come true Monday, January 8th. But I did not pick Washington to participate in this game. I did once I studied their matchup against Texas, but that was only when the matchup came out. At no point during the regular season or the preseason did I think that Washington was going to participate in the national championship game or have a shot to win it all, in the sense that you participate in the national championship game and you're not like TCU last year, where in retrospect, and I should have seen it coming before the game even kicked off, that Georgia was just going to blow out the Horned Frogs. Washington not only is participating in this game, but they do have a chance against the Wolverines. That's why the spread is only -4.5. That's why the majority of public bettors, whether that's wise or other or not, are picking the Huskies to cover. 68% of public bettors are picking the Huskies to cover the 4.5-point spread against the Wolverines. And many analysts are picking Washington to win this game, as many analysts are also picking the Wolverines to win. So that combination, from a preseason angle, I guess I was close, and I think many others were close, as I knew others who had Michigan winning it all and also had Washington participating in the college football playoff like I did. But seriously, let me know if you predicted this matchup in the preseason to be the national championship game. I'd be very intrigued, and I'm going to give you a round of applause if you do so. But these are two teams that they have some of the best staffs in the country. Developmentally, schematically, they know how to recruit, not in the sense that you're thinking of, where you're getting the KJ Boldens, the Jeremiah Smiths, the Dylan Raiolas, Julian Sayans, JJ McCarthy's, Donovan Edwards's, Emeka Egbuka's, and JT Tuimoloau's, or several other 5 stars, the Corey Foreman's, Trevor Lawrence's of the world. But they know how to recruit players who I think are undervalued by recruiting services, or players who have a higher ceiling and have plenty of room for development compared to where they are coming out of high school. I mean, Washington is not even top 25 in team talent composite. Michigan is not even top 10. And that, the fact that they're here in this national championship game, the fact that Michigan beat Penn State, Alabama, and Ohio State, 3 teams that this year are rated higher, that are more talented than Michigan by a recruiting standpoint on 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite, shows how great of a developmental program they are, how good they are schematically. I mean, Michigan, I think, is the best developmental program in the country, and their staff is dialed in, and they know how to out-scheme anyone in the country. I think Washington's staff is the same, and we will see who is the better schemer and maybe who's the better developmental program this Monday. Washington has played USC, they've played Oregon twice, they've played Texas. 4 games off the top of my head where I can list teams that Washington played who had more talented rosters via recruiting rankings than they did. And they beat USC by double digits. They really dominated Texas, and they nearly gave that game away, but they controlled Texas or kept pace with them for 3 quarters. They dominated Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game, and they kept ahead of Oregon enough to pull out a win in the regular season matchup. These staffs, these players, they work very hard, and they know what they're doing. And there's a togetherness and a unity and a cohesiveness about these teams and these programs. That's why they're here. The reason why Michigan and Washington beat Alabama and Texas, respectively, is even though the Longhorns and the Crimson Tide had more talent than the Wolverines and the Huskies, the Wolverines and the Huskies had a coaching advantage overall, factoring in head coach and assistants. They had the better strength and conditioning programs. They had the better play overall on the lines of scrimmage and also at skill position. They were straight up the better teams because of their development and because of their schematics. Both of these teams, I think, need a win here desperately. I will say that. I'm not going to, in this video, choose, I believe, who needs it more. I want you all to come up with that opinion yourself and tell me in the comment section below, as I encouraged you to a few minutes ago. We're going to start off with Washington, give an overlook of the near and attempt to give an overlook of the distant future of the team, and talk a little bit about their team. Even. Washington, like Michigan, is very senior laden. They have a lot of veterancy, and they have a winning head coach, winning staff. And they set a record for wins in a season. Washington has never had 14 wins in a single season. First time ever. Their last national championship was in 1991. The 1991 Washington Huskies were 12-0, 8-0 in the Pac-10, led by legendary coach Don James. They actually beat Michigan in the Rose Bowl 34-14 that season. Michigan was 10-1 under head coach Gary Moeller. Washington was favored by about a touchdown, and they covered, winning by 20 points in the Rose Bowl. Undisputed national champions. Well, actually, still number 2 in the AP poll, number 1 in the coaches poll. I forget who was named number 1 in the AP poll that year, but Washington, they won it fair and square. It was a different era back then. The national championship and college football playoff there wasn't a guaranteed 1 versus 2 every year. In fact, that was rarely the case before the BCS, that the number 1 and number 2 team would meet up, especially if it was in the number 1 or number 2 team, one of them was in the Pac-12 or the Big Ten, as they had a contract where they had to play in the Rose Bowl if they were the champions of their respective conference, which back then was really only the champions who were going to be in the top 2 were competing for a national championship. That was Washington's last national title in 1991. And I think it's awesome that Washington, just as a side note, along with Oregon, USC, and UCLA, are joining the Big Ten. The Huskies' 2024 recruiting class is ranked 29th overall by 24/7 Sports rankings. 29th. The Huskies this season at one point were outside of the top 50 in recruiting, but they have quickly picked up steam. Right now, the Huskies in high school recruiting are 36. They have 16 total commits. They have 7 4-stars, 9 3-stars, and in total they have 7 incoming transfers coming from the likes of Vanderbilt, San Diego State, California, Fresno State, Mississippi State, with Will Rogers, longtime starting quarterback there under the late Mike Leach, who's a legend. Rest in peace to him. And their transfer portal class is 18th. Averaging those out, they have the 29th overall recruiting class for the 2024 cycle. And I think you can expect the Huskies to add more transfer players, not just as commitments from the first transfer portal cycle continue to flow in, but when the second cycle in the spring opens up. This is Washington's second college football playoff appearance and first appearance in the national title game in the college football playoff era. The Huskies are a great college football program. That's why they were able to fend off Ryan Grubb from Alabama. That's why they're able to pay Kalen DeBoer a great amount of money. That's why they were able to hire him in the first place. That's why Kalen DeBoer came in and with his scheme and his staff, he was able to turn a team from, I think, a 4-8 record to 11-2 in his first year in 2022. Phenomenal job by Kalen DeBoer. He is a top 10 head coach. Absolutely. Washington is a top 20, maybe top 15 college football program, but they are not a blue blood. They're not elite. They don't reload with top 15 classes every year either, and they will have to rebuild likely in 2024. Now, what does rebuilding mean under Kalen DeBoer? He's a great head coach. Washington has depth this season. We've seen that with Dylan Johnson after Cameron Davis was injured. Their wide receiver room is deep because Jeremy Bernard is a backup, and I think he's going to be one of college football's best receivers next season. At tight end, they have Jack Westover, who will likely come back, Devin Culp. Their offensive line is deep as well, as they just picked up where they left off after Mateo Mele sadly got injured at center. So I don't know what rebuilding looks like. Rebuilding might mean they're not undefeated next season and they don't win their conference, but they still make the 12-team playoff. Rebuilding might mean they miss the 12-team playoff, or maybe they finish with more than 2 or 3 losses. Who knows what that means? But I don't think next year's team, particularly with Michael Penix leaving, he's done a phenomenal job at Washington these past 2 seasons, and Will Rogers or maybe Dylan Morris being in that quarterback competition, I don't think they will be as good as they are this season. That's what I mean by a rebuild, is they won't play up to this standard. And I know that Washington consistently, because they are a proud college football program, because Kalen DeBoer and the athletic department and the players and the staff have invested so much, Washington wants to consistently compete for conference championships, national championships. It's why they made the move to the Big Ten and exited when it was pretty evident that the Pac-12 was imploding. They did it before, the Arizonas, Colorados, and so on and so forth of the world left for the Big 12. So that, in a sense, is a downside for Washington. It's a reason they need this more than perhaps Michigan. But a reason they may not need it more than, let's say, Michigan or another team they're matching up with is I think Kalen DeBoer's committed to Washington. And him being a great head coach, him only being here for 2 seasons, and Washington's already this good, imagine what slightly better recruiting and DeBoer continuing to get his guys in does for this team. Maybe they can be a semi-annual or annual national title contender and make the college football playoff every year when it expands to 12 teams. He's staying with the Huskies for now. Maybe sometime in the near or distant future, he'll want to depart, or his services will be up, frankly, for sale. He'll want to get a different job, or he'll at least entertain the offerings from other programs. But it's not as likely to occur as coaches at other programs at Washington's level, or even at Michigan with Jim Harbaugh and the yearly rumors surrounding the NFL. I think that his staff and himself are committed to Washington, or they are more committed to Washington than other head coaches and staffs around the country. Washington is a 4.5-point underdog in the national championship game. They have a top 10 quarterback in Michael Penix. I would say a top 2 quarterback. I think he's only behind Jaden Daniels this season in terms of quarterback play. 35 passing touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 4,648 passing yards. The Huskies this season have a top 25 scoring offense. I was going to say top 10, but they're 11th actually, scoring 37.6 points per game. They're first in passing yards per game, averaging 350. They're 50th in scoring defense, allowing 23.6 points per game on average. Roma Dunze and Jalen Polk are 1,000-yard receivers, and Braylon Trice is a future NFL defensive end, will likely be picked in the first round after he declares for the NFL after the national title game. Washington can win the national title because they have an offense to exploit even an elite defense, like Michigan's. And they have a togetherness about them. Their defense, while not elite, has come up in big moments. They have 16 interceptions on the season. They essentially won Washington's game against Arizona State, which, seeing how bad Arizona State was, that would have been a crippling loss. They've limited great and consistent offenses like Oregon's twice. They shut down Texas and were able to get pressure on Quinn Ewers. Washington, with their play at skill positions, with the number one receiver room in the country, I think the number one offense in the country when functioning at peak efficiency, they can get ahead of the Wolverines, and they've also showcased themselves to be not stymie, but I guess the term is like together, or being able to stymie other opponents with their defense, because their defense is a good defense. It's not elite or great, but for Washington, they could score on every drive or every other drive, and Washington's defense can come up with enough stops or maybe a few forced turnovers to give the Huskies more possessions on offense to do damage. So the Huskies need this win. They can get this win, but do they need it more than the Wolverines, and will they win this game? Well, before we make a decision on that, and before we watch the national championship game, let's look at the Michigan perspective. They've earned 14 wins, much like Washington, for the first time ever. Their last national championship was in 1997. The Michigan Wolverines' 1997 team was 12-0, 8-0 in the Big Ten. They beat Washington State back when they were a consistently great program in the Rose Bowl, 21-16, with Charles Woodson, the Heisman Trophy winner, the only defensive player to ever win the Heisman Trophy, having, I think, 2 interceptions and just overall a great game. Michigan was the AP poll national champion. They were not the national champion in both the AP and coaches poll, though, like Washington in 1991, as the Nebraska Cornhuskers, led by quarterback Scott Frost and head coach Tom Osborne, won the coaches poll national championship that season. Michigan's 2024 recruiting class is it's not 29th overall, it's 19th overall. I don't know why that wasn't corrected, because I remember editing that and typing 19th, but it is what it is. They're 19th overall, and that's because their transfer portal class only has 2 commits, and it's 62nd nationally, with Jayshawn Barham coming in from Maryland at linebacker, and Josh Preby coming in on the interior of the offensive line at guard from Northwestern. Out of high school, Michigan has the 15th highest rated recruiting class, with the 62 portal class that averages out to the 19th overall recruiting class for the 2024 cycle. Michigan out of high school has 18 4-star commits and 9 3-star commits, total of 27 high school commits, and I imagine Michigan is going to add more transfers, so that is more than 30, yeah, you heard that right, more than 30 incoming players in the 2024 cycle. But that's because Michigan is losing a lot after this season. They will have to rebuild, in my mind, much like Washington will. This is Michigan's 3rd college football playoff appearance and first appearance in the national championship game, as they missed out on national championship game appearances in 21 and 22 when they lost to Georgia and TCU respectively. Michigan is one of college football's blue bloods, and they have endless resources, more resources than Washington, and there are schools that have more resources than Michigan, even non-blue bloods, like Texas A&M, for example, or blue bloods like Texas, Alabama, fringe blue bloods, I would say like Georgia, who are probably one national title or an SEC title or a few more wins away from achieving blue blood status, or maybe they already are blue bloods. I don't know. Ohio State, I've heard they've struggled on the NIL front, so I don't know if they have more resources than Michigan. But Michigan, there are very few programs that have more resources than the Wolverines, if any, if Michigan decides that they really want to invest in football as the number one thing. Even with Harbaugh's future up in the air, Moore is in waiting to be the next head coach. Sharon Moore is Michigan's offensive coordinator, primary play caller, and also offensive line coach. And he's been a better play caller this year than he was last season, and he is an elite offensive line coach, both as a recruiter and developer. And I think seeing how he managed Michigan against Bowling Green, or against Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State when Harbaugh was yet again suspended, this time for the cheating scandal, being 4-0 in those games, and even with mistakes, and I don't think playing to 100% of team capacity in any of those matchups, still leading consistently those opponents, controlling them, especially when you look at Penn State and Ohio State, was very impressive. Balancing the duties of play calling and being a CEO. And I think as long as Moore wouldn't try and replicate Ryan Day, for example, or Brent Venables in calling his defensive plays, as long as Moore hired a offensive coordinator and play caller, if Harbaugh leaves and he becomes a pure CEO, I think he would be a great head coach, a near elite, potentially elite head coach, as long as, he progressed and learned, as he is a new head coach, and it is rare for new head coaches to immediately be elite. They have to learn. But that's something that's very good. Michigan is fortunate to have Sharon Moore on their staff from what I can only interpret as head coach in waiting, because after last season, he could have become a head coach in the Group of Five or perhaps at some Power Five jobs. Now, you can bet that most Power 5 programs would be happy to have Moore as their head coach based on the fact that he's a coordinator with, honestly, game management and head coaching experience, in part due to Harbaugh's suspension, or suspensions plural. So that's good. And Michigan also recruits at a higher level than Washington. The more blue chip talent you have, the better depth you have, the more likely you are to be in that national title conversation, as long as you have a great staff, great coaching, etc. Michigan, I think, is the best staff in the country, developmentally and schematically, as Harbaugh's a top 3 head coach, and I think that Sharon Moore and Jesse Minter are among the best coordinators in the country. And Michigan has elite assistants like Steve Klinkscale, for example, or Mike Hart coaching secondary and running back specifically. However, a downside for Michigan is they're not a recruiting or NIL powerhouse, and Harbaugh's future is up in the air. We don't know if he will return to Michigan after 2023, and Michigan has not shown themselves willing to use name, image, and likeness, or to be more, not impolite, but just more honest, pay for play. Michigan has not dove headfirst into the pay for play realm. And in part, I'm thankful for that. But now we're about, what, 1 or 2 seasons into this whole NIL pay for play stuff. We're 2 seasons in. And Michigan hasn't really budged. And it's good to only pay players who've proved it to a certain degree. But if you can just get a few players who want to be developed and want to go to a good institution, but they also do want to be paid for their name, image, and likeness, does it really hurt that much to set aside, whether it's a few million more likely or even in the 8 figures, to get some high-level 4 stars or 5 stars to come to your program? I don't know, because I'm not a football coach, and we're still new in this whole name, image, and likeness era, and we've seen it destroy locker rooms and teams. Like, look at Texas A&M, or quite frankly, I think Miami and maybe even Florida. Like some of these teams that gave out big NIL deals or really dove headfirst into that have cratered. And if anything, it appears to me that ever since the transfer portal and NIL era, that raw high school recruiting and raw high school talent isn't as important. I mean, look at this season. Michigan has transfers all along the offensive line, at parts at defensive line, linebacker with Ernest Hausman, and Washington, Penix, he's a transfer. Jabbar Muhammad, one of their best defenders, is a transfer. And Dylan Johnson, very important and underrated player on offense, is a transfer. So Michigan and Washington are not elite recruiting schools. Michigan, though, is a better recruiting school, in part because of brand, better resources, and reputation than Washington. By reputation, I mean like recent. Brand is more all-time. Reputation is like, what have you done in my lifetime as a recruit type stuff. But Michigan, I think their disadvantages are more so around the, I would say, Short-term future if Harbaugh leaves, long-term future with recruiting and NIL. And I think for Washington, I don't know exactly. I think Washington's concerns are more unknown because Kalen DeBoer's only been there for 2 seasons. And I also think they're at the same time more known because of Washington's history with recruiting and the fact that I think most Washington fans are just happy to be here, whereas a lot of Michigan fans really want this win because they don't know if they will be back if Harbaugh leaves or if Michigan doesn't adapt in the NIL era, and if Michigan will ever be back for a national championship. So those are my thoughts, just outlining Michigan and outlining Washington. The Michigan Wolverines are a 4.5-point favorite in this game. J.J. McCarthy threw for 3 touchdowns against Alabama. He seems to be healthier. Corum's rushed for 1,111 yards and 25 touchdowns. The Wolverines have the number 1 scoring defense, only allowing 9.5 points per game. They have the 15th scoring offense, scoring 36 points per game. They are 73rd and 62nd in passing yards and rushing yards on offense, respectively. But their defense is amazing, and they are ridiculously efficient at utilizing every yard, as they are number 1 in yards per point. Also number 1 in points per play margin and yards per point margin. Thank you all for watching this video. If you want to support the channel, please join my Patreon. Your support's always appreciated, however, it is never expected. Thanks to Crash2488 for sponsoring this video as a Heisman patron. Thanks to Spencer Bringhurst for sponsoring this video as an All-American patron. And thanks to Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Chris Lane, Austin Christmas, and Zubin Zah for sponsoring this video as an All-Conference patron. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you all around. Bye-bye.